It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is Locked On NFL Sunday. Thank you very much for joining us for week 11 of the NFL season. You've got myself, Ross Jackson, my good friend and co-host, Cody Roark. You can follow him on Twitter at Cody Roark NFL, myself on Twitter at Ross Jackson Nola. And of course, be sure to check out the Locked On Podcast Network. Whatever your favorite team is, we have you covered. MLB, NBA, NHL, NFL, and college sports. We got it all here across the network, but it's Sunday, so it's all about Locked On NFL Sunday right now. My friend, how are you?
I'm good. We even have a rugby podcast as well.
That's right.
Get out there for all
and
those
AFL,
listeners.
We got all that going on.
I'm doing great, Ross. I'm doing great. It's week 11 here. The fact that we've made it on the airways for 11 straight weeks, I think it speaks volumes to the amazing audience that we have respectively with our shows and also just the audience we've grown through Locked On NFL Sunday, because this is the one pregame show, folks, where we actually talk about every single team, every single game, and we bring in the local experts. So you're not getting fluff on just one or two teams in an hour-long broadcast. We're bringing it all to you here, Locked On NFL Sunday.
Absolutely. We appreciate everybody for coming in. Don't forget, regardless of where you're watching, if it's YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, or Periscope, you can comment. You can let us know how you feel about the certain games we're talking about. If you have questions, you can drop them in the chat. We'll be able to bring them up here. It'll kind of look like this. Pop up on the screen there at the bottom for you. But go ahead and drop any correspondence you like down in the chat. And of course, we are more than happy and excited to be able to interact with you. It's our favorite part of doing these Sunday morning shows, aside from, of course, talking through all of the NFL action. And Cody, let's get right down to it. The Thursday night game, you got a win for the Seattle Seahawks. The Seattle Seahawks going up against the Arizona Cardinals. What a fun two primetime games we got out of these two teams this year.
Yeah, it was. I mean, this was a game that came down to the wire at a fourth down attempt, and Kyler Murray trying to lead the heroics for the second consecutive week. Unfortunately, the pass would be incomplete. Actually, you get sacked on fourth down. The third down pass to Andy Isabella, which would have been on the 1 yard line, kind of went through his hands there. So I mean, it was an entertaining game. But the one thing that stood out to me is I think Seattle, they actually found a way defensively to really focus their efforts on containing Kyler Murray. Like when he became a runner, I mean, outside of Jamal Adams getting twisted, KJ Wright and Bobby Wagner, I mean, these guys, they did a really good job of not biting on some of his head fakes, and they stood hip for him. So the NFC West, we've talked about it. Such a fun division in football. And every time these teams match up, minus even the 49ers at this point who are banged up, it is fun to watch. And this, like I said, I think this is the best division in football right now.
Yeah, absolutely. They're so much fun to watch, and we get a little bit more of it on Monday Night Football with the Rams. They're going to be taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, so another one at the top of the NFC there. Real quick, want to get this shout out up on the screen. Ryan Roberts, one of our hosts of Locked On Irish, the Clemson slaying Notre Dame Irish, wanted to say what's up to you, but there's a lot, man, with this NFC West. And I'll tell you, you mentioned that Andy Isabella. I'll call it a drop. Let's just call it a miscue, maybe. Yeah. He was a shorthanded guy at UMass coming into the NFL, one of those big, deep threats. But I'll tell you who really stood out for me, and it was the Seattle Seahawks newly acquired defensive end, Carlos Dunlap, sort of rejuvenating out of nowhere after being sent over from the Cincinnati Bengals.
Yeah, a change of scenery always does wonders, and Carlos Dunlap made the biggest play of the game. He was the game winner. It was the sack on Kyler Murray, and I felt bad for Kyler in that situation because it didn't seem like his right tackle didn't really give him much time to be able to stand in that pocket and throw it. And like you said, the biggest moments of the games, and you come up big. Carlos Dunlap benefiting from that. Obviously, a very prestigious veteran in the National Football League. But one of the things also that stood out to me is just it was just a weird game. It wasn't as free flowing. And the Seahawks, in my opinion, they lose a great guy in Greg Olsen with the torn fascia in his foot, and it's just every single year for the last 3 or 4 years, I feel like we've seen Greg Olsen go down with a key injury. Now, granted, he was supposed to be a Fox analyst. Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll, they talked him into coming in and playing, but he even said himself he's not going out this way. So I imagine we are going to see the old man back next season, maybe on a 1-year deal in Seattle.
I love it, man. I love it. Be good to see him back. That's a tough injury for a big guy. You know what I mean? Like for tight end, offensive lineman, that is a big injury for a guy like that. It's not just going to be us today, Cody. We're going to be joined by a few of the Locked On experts, the local experts from around the Locked On Podcast Network. We're going to be bringing in Bill Rossetti of the Locked On Panthers. Talk a little bit about what's been going on in Carolina. Started off so hot, and then now all of a sudden they're on a little bit of a downward spiral, I guess you could say. And we've seen this pattern from the Panthers before, maybe a little bit of a culture change, you would imagine, coming with the coaching, but we'll talk a little bit more about that. Aaron Freeman's going to join us to talk about the Atlanta Falcons. Raheem Morris taking over for Dan Quinn, 3-1 in the last 4 games since he's taken over. And of course, they get the very interesting task of facing the New Orleans Saints with a new quarterback at the helm, which of course we'll talk about as well. And then we'll bring in Q Myers from Locked On Raiders, talk a little bit about the primetime game up against the Kansas City Chiefs. They stole one in Arrowhead. Can they seal a victory at home at Allegiant as well? But we have a whole slate of games all throughout this Sunday. Very action-packed. We're back to having more games in the early portion than in the afternoon portion, however, after the fun week we had last week.
Red Zone was fun last week. I can tell you that. I just sat back and I lounged a little bit in my couch, and I just watched every single game because we were treated. And they were all on Fox too, which was interesting.
Right.
So being able to spread that out, we got to hear Aqib Talib in the booth for the Washington and the Detroit game.
He was solid too. I loved hearing his input on the game.
I would love to see. I like the emphasis of former players, like well-versed players, coming into the broadcast booth because they share so much knowledge. And I think everyone's looking for like the next Tony Romo. But here's the deal: Tony Romo is one of a kind. I mean, him and Jim Nantz are the best dynamic crew in terms of commentary. And I know we talk a lot about commentary crews. I know it's a common discussion I see amongst fans. But being able to see former players come in, I still want to say that my bold prediction, and we're gonna clip this video, so 5 to 6 years from now, it's gonna come true. Both Peyton Manning and Tom Brady will be doing Monday Night Football in the next 5 to 6 years.
I like that. And we already know that Drew Brees has his NBC contract, so I assume that means we'll see him on Sunday nights as well.
Yes, it's going to be fun. Like I said, I think this is a week where we're finally getting into a very important part. You see some top-heavy competition in the NFC. I mean, I think are in the top 7 seeds. I mean, really, if the NFL changed the playoff format, no team in the NFC East would make the playoffs this year. But unfortunately, due to the format that is, one of those struggling teams, one of those bottom teams in terms of overall league, they're going to be making the playoffs. And, I think a team like the New York Giants, to be for an example for you, Ross, I feel like they're one of those teams that if they get into the playoffs, if they win that division, they might surprise some people, right? Because every game they've been in has been really close for the most part.
They've been surprisingly competitive. Yeah, they've been very surprisingly competitive. And you hit the nail on the head there. They just have to be able to finish. And whether it's a mental thing or an execution thing late in games, they just seem to lack in that aspect. And we've seen that across the NFL. We've seen a lot of teams with an inability to finish at this point in the season, more so than we've seen in the past.
Yeah, it's pain. Joe Judge. I think Joe Judge has done a pretty good job. I mean, when you would have told me that the primary stakeholder of your offense is Saquon Barkley would go out week 2 with the torn ACL, and that they would still be competitive in games and they'd still find some rhythm, and they're really finding a way to make that happen. Defensively, I think that they're very underrated. I think James Bradbury's playing the best football
really
right now.
Solid signing.
He's elite. He's playing elite football because the team's best wide receivers are going up against him, and they're not coming away with as much targets or as much receptions overall in production. He's done a phenomenal job. So I think things are actually looking up for the New York Giants despite their record. And so we talk about just anything can happen in the playoffs. Go back to 2007 New York Giants, right? They made it in as the wild card, and then bam, they won the Super Bowl.
Yep.
So these are things I go through and I think of, and I feel like I get a similar vibe here from this New York Giants team. But am I saying that they're going to compete for Super Bowl? I don't think so, but I think they could surprise a team in the playoffs for sure.
Yeah, they could be one of those. They could be one of those spoilers, right? They spoil somebody's time in the playoffs, especially with the early wild card games for everybody now, and only one team getting a bye. I think you're absolutely right. In just a second here, we're going to be bringing in Bill Rossetti of the Locked On Panthers podcast, talk a little bit about the Carolina Panthers, Teddy Bridgewater, and this new coaching staff and how it's been working out for them so far this season. But just to hit on a couple of these games to get started, I wanted to draw everyone's attention to that Detroit at Carolina spread, which is actually even for this game. There's not, it's essentially a toss-up. We've seen this a couple of times so far this season, but we don't always see it a ton. Detroit has had some trouble holding on to leads. Carolina has shown a propensity to come back in games, but then also have a little bit of there. These are two teams that have had some trouble, along with several other teams around the NFL closing games out. How are you feeling about just what this matchup can be, between these two teams here in the NFC?
Well, when I look at it, Matthew Stafford's questionable. He's more than likely going to play. He's got that thumb injury. And so, I think when we talk about thumb injuries, being able to grip the football, right? Because the thumb, when I'm holding the ball, really it's the thumb. If you have no thumb, guess what? You can't play football. Right. So that's going to be a big storyline to watch in this game. And then also, too, Teddy Bridgewater, limited in practice most of this week with that knee injury he sustained last week. I think they're going to go as far as Teddy goes. I think Teddy's done a really good job. And you're familiar with Teddy because he spent some time in New Orleans. And obviously, you're the host of Locked On Saints. But they're dealing with injuries to Teddy. They're dealing with injuries to Christian McCaffrey, who's going to be out of this matchup. But when those guys are all healthy, this is a team, as we saw them compete with Kansas City, this is a team I feel like can go a long ways. And they're very, very strong. And once again, that division in the NFC South is it's brutal right now.
It's a brutal one. It always is. It's always a fun one to watch. All right, let's go ahead and bring in our first guest for the day. Welcoming in Bill Rossetti at Bill_Rossetti, host of Locked On Panthers every single Monday through Friday. Bill, how are you, buddy?
What's going on, guys? Great to finally be here.
Yeah, man. Glad to have you on. We appreciate you taking the time to come and join us this morning. So, we were talking a little bit about the Carolina Panthers and what the season has looked like so far. Can you walk me through a little bit about what we've seen from Carolina throughout this season? They look like a team that was ready to surprise everybody, but over the last couple of weeks, they've been struggling a little bit. Is this just sort of a bump in the road area? Do you expect to see them get better throughout the season and get back to the way they were playing early on? Or are we kind of bottoming out at this point and looking toward the future for this team, which I do think is bright?
Yeah, I think it's looking ahead to the future as well. I mean, it's certainly been a bit of a roller coaster for sure. I mean, those first 5 weeks, like you mentioned, really competitive in a lot of these games, had a winning record after 5 games. And I'm sitting here thinking at 3-2, could this actually be a playoff team? Looking ahead at the schedule, they had a lot of winnable games, but then they dropped the Chicago game. They lost a couple games that they probably could have won, but you see, and you mentioned the culture change before. Absolutely correct. Matt Rule has certainly instilled a winning attitude already in this team. You're seeing this team play very competitive. Like I said, I mean, you're looking at the last 2 weeks, they either had a lead or were tied at the half. And we're talking about 2 teams that could very well be meeting in the Super Bowl, in the Chiefs and the Buccaneers. It's just, they faltered in the second half. So really, to me, this is kind of this is a showing that this is a team that doesn't know yet how to win, but that's okay because this is a very young roster. They're still developing. I mean, you're playing a number of rookies and second-year players on this defense. It's natural for this team to have these kind of bumps in the road, especially with some of the offenses that they've been going against. So, yeah, this season's pretty much lost at 3-7, but I think the future is very bright. I agree with you.
Well, and one of the things I've noticed here with this Carolina Panthers team, as you mentioned, I mean, they're 17-17 with the Buccaneers, and then you have a turnover, you have a mistake, and then Tampa Bay just capitalized on that last week. And that's the thing you're going to deal with a young football team. But like you said, I think Matt Rule has done a phenomenal job because I think coming into the season, everybody thought that Carolina was going to be the team that was going to be picking number 1 overall, right? Because they just cleaned house with everybody. But they've been so surprisingly competitive, and that youth on the defensive side of the ball has really re-energized them. Now, with the injuries to Christian McCaffrey, we know Teddy Bridgewater's dealing with that MCL sprain right now. In your opinion, where do you feel like this offense is at in this matchup against the Detroit Lions? What is it that you think they have to do today in order to come out on top?
I think this would be a great day to get Mike Davis back involved in the offense. We've seen him kind of be a little quiet, I guess we'll say, over the last couple of weeks, kind of shy away from him. But this is a Lions defense that is pretty bad against the run. I mean, it's a pretty bad defense overall, but especially against the run. So Mike Davis, this is a perfect opportunity. We always like to use the words like get right game. This, I think, is that perfect opportunity for Mike Davis, and with the receivers, I'd like to see Robbie Anderson. He's gotten a lot of catches, but he's been surprisingly quiet in the touchdown department. Excuse me. I mean, I think still since week 1, I think is his only touchdown of the season. So if they can get him involved, I think this is a good opportunity for this offense as a whole, especially if Teddy Bridgewater plays, which I think he will. But we'll see. We're about 15 minutes away from knowing for sure. If he plays, I think that's certainly a huge boost to this Panthers offense. I do like PJ Walker, though. He showed he can sling the ball in
I like that guy.
Good time. Yeah, absolutely. What he did in the XFL, what he's done so far with the Panthers. If Teddy can't go, I think PJ Walker will be fine, but I do think Teddy is going to play, and I think this offense is going to be fine today.
Yeah. For fantasy owners out there, Mike Davis is a pretty good play this week, with Detroit giving up the most fantasy points per game to running backs. And you've also seen Mike Davis carry the ball at least 10 times every game without Christian McCaffrey. And he's got 5 catches or more in 6 games as well for your PPR league. So he's getting a lot of touches, and that's really what you look for in these running backs. I want to ask you about a specific player over on the defensive side. You already know how much I'm a fan of this guy, and I was a fan of him in the draft process this year. You talked about the young guys. You talked about some of these guys over on the defensive side as well. Tell me a little bit about Jeremy Chin and what he has brought to this team, I see him oftentimes as a strong side linebacker, but also playing really all over the place for this team.
I mean, he was one of my biggest man crushes leading up into the 2020 draft. It
was hard not to love that guy coming in, man.
You really couldn't. I mean, talking to him at the Combine, seeing him at the Senior Bowl, he's just the guy you root for, right? Yeah. And he was going to be fantastic, I think, for whatever defense he landed with. I personally think it was a great situation, him landing in Carolina, because he was kind of what the Panthers needed with this rebuilding team, that jack of all trades, master of, a couple. He's eventually going to be a master of some of these positions, but he's
Steve Atwater's nephew too.
That's right.
Yeah.
So,
good bloodline.
He just has the pedigree, right? He has the pedigree, like you mentioned. He does it all. I think he's a contender for Defensive Rookie of the Year. I mean, he's one of the league, not just one of the team leaders in tackles, but I think he's still up there, or at least he was up there in terms of total tackles before, he missed a couple games due to injury. So, without that injury obviously hurts his case, but still, I mean, he was having a terrific rookie year and really softening the blow, I guess we'll say, of losing Luke Kuechly. Obviously, you can't fill that in 1 year, but he's done a nice job of, easing the pain, I guess we'll say, for lack of a better term. But he's been just incredible, and this is a completely more athletic defense when he is on the field.
Yeah.
Part of me wants to wonder, too, if Luke Kuechly's role with the Panthers right now, has been helpful. I wonder how much of an impact that has actually made defensively for this football team. So that's something I'd be intrigued to find out after the season. But one of the things I want to talk to you about now is obviously when you take a look at the stretch, you look at the division, the NFC South is so tough. We've seen the Carolina Panthers play all of these teams tough. In your opinion, what do you think is the one missing ingredient that this team has right now? What is lacking from Carolina, in your opinion, that separates the other teams from them right now?
I think if there's one area of this team that could really use some improvement, it's going to be the interior offensive line. I mean, I liked Chris Reed when he came into the starting lineup after coming off the COVID list, but he's been kind of off and on. Matt Paradis is probably a goner at the end of the season. You need some youth. You need some juiced up talent on there. Tight end's been a disappointing position as well for me, I think. I was a big fan of Ian Thomas coming into the season, and he's been extremely quiet this year. Even Colin Thompson had a touchdown last week, for crying out loud. So it's the youth, the experience, I think, is definitely a factor. I mean, you look at teams like the Saints and the Buccaneers and all the talent they have and the experience, whatnot, and obviously the quarterback play. No disrespect to Teddy Bridgewater, but you can just see the talent gap between all these rosters, and that's really what's setting the Panthers back. Now, I've been saying 2022, I think, is a good year to really keep an eye on this team, maybe even earlier, but 2022 I've been pinpointing because, Ross, I'm sure as you know, Drew Brees certainly will not be there most likely in 2022. Tom Brady will probably not be in Tampa Bay in 2022. And you start to wonder how much longer Matt Ryan has in Atlanta. So we're starting to see now, I think Carolina is going to be that team that's going to start creeping up on teams within the next year or two. I think this upcoming draft especially is going to be extremely important toward what direction this team ends up going in. So this is going to be a fascinating offseason, especially with, does Matt Rule take the reins? Do they move on from Marty Herney? A lot of questions coming into this offseason I think are going to be really interesting to follow.
Yeah. All I know is that when it comes to this draft class, Chris Olave better end up nowhere in the NFC South outside of the New Orleans Saints. I will be livid. Bill, we appreciate you so much for coming through, man. I got to ask you, we talked a little bit about the spread here being even between these two teams. What are you looking at for this game before we let you go? Who you got the Carolina Panthers pulling this one out?
Man, this is the perfect spread. I think for this game, this is an absolute toss-up. I think I've been going back and forth. I was leaning toward the Lions just because I think if Matthew Stafford plays,
sure,
he gives the Lions obviously the quarterback edge, but it balances out because they don't have Kenny Golladay and DeAndre Swift is out.
That's big too. He's really come on lately.
That's huge, and I'm really curious what they're going to do in the running game. It sounds like Peterson and Kerryon Johnson are going to split carries. I'm going to slightly lean toward the Panthers in this one now. So, boy, that's a perfect spread. Vegas knows what they're doing there.
We appreciate you, man. Thank you very much for taking the time to come through. Cody, you got anything else before we let Bill out of here?
I'm all good, Bill. We'll see you here in a couple weeks for a crossover Thursday when the Broncos have to travel to Carolina.
Yes, sir. Looking forward to it, buddy.
There you go. Take care, bro. We appreciate you coming through.
Guys. Have a good one.
Don't forget to check out Bill on Twitter at Bill_Rossetti. Check him out Monday through Friday over at Locked On Panthers.
It's been a bummer just to see the injuries like to Christian McCaffrey, because when we saw him return against the Chiefs, I felt like that was a very, very powerful offense. And then, not saying, look, Mike Davis, I think, has done a phenomenal job, but it's noticeably different when you have those two backs in there in comparison to just having one. And Mike Davis still very, very good running back, but Christian McCaffrey, you can tell his presence is missed out there. And and I look at the wide receiver talent that the Carolina Panthers have. With Robbie Anderson, he's been one of those guys this year that's been moving the chains. And so I think defensively, they match up really well, in my opinion, against this Detroit Lions offense. And I think that the offense has an advantage against this Detroit Lions defense, which can't stop the run, can't stop anybody for that.
Right.
So it's going to be something to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. We also watched the Detroit Lions have their two starting wide receivers, DeAndre Swift and Matthew Stafford, going up against the New Orleans Saints team, also in the NFC South not too long ago, without their two top corners, and the Saints being able to pull that one out as well. So, it's not like the Panthers don't have a familiar team to look at and say, there's a way to do it, right? That tape is definitely out there. And speaking of familiar teams within the NFC South, we're going to move on to our next guest here. We're going to bring in our good friend, Aaron Freeman of Locked On Falcons. Not the first time he's been here with the show. We've seen that beautiful mug before. Man, how are you doing, bud?
I'm doing good. I had a late evening last night celebrating a birthday with my brother over Zoom. And, had to get some extra coffee, but I'm now excited and ready to see the legend of Taysom Hill fall short a little bit today, maybe.
Yeah, that's going to be one of the big things. Let's go ahead and dive right into it. I mean, obviously, there's a ton going on with this game. And, you and I did a really, I thought, great crossover preview of this game. And we spent so much time talking about, just like everybody else, Jameis Winston going up against the Atlanta Falcons here and sort of what his track record has been. And of course, you want to learn more about the Atlanta Falcons, check out Locked On Falcons with Aaron Freeman here at FalcFans on Twitter. But now we're going to see Taysom Hill getting the start reportedly for the New Orleans Saints. Some late breaking reports just now coming out, although, sources questionable, but some places talking about maybe we do still see a little bit of Jameis. So it's a big question mark here. What can you tell us about, the expectations for the Atlanta Falcons and what this game looks like now with, let's just operate under the assumption that Taysom Hill is going to be the starting quarterback for the Saints?
Yeah, you can never put anything past Sean Payton in his ability to troll the Falcons. He definitely leans into the rivalry. So we'll see what happens, when kickoff happens. But I think for the Falcons, at least, I think they're sort of licking their chops if Taysom Hill's going to be the starting quarterback, because the strength of the Falcons defense has been their run defense, and the weakness has been their pass defense. And you would assume with Taysom Hill that his tendencies is he's going to want to run the football, and there's going to be a heavy focus on the run with him under center, and that seems to play closer to the strengths of the Falcons defense. So I feel like, at least in theory, the Falcons have been known to disappoint me, but at least in theory, this is a potential matchup that favors the Falcons if they decide to go with Taysom Hill over Jameis Winston.
Oh, I think it's going to be interesting too. I mean, we talk about the times where Atlanta, I feel like they are so much more different. I mean, night and day, noticeably different with Raheem Morris and the way that he's running things right now than Dan Quinn. And that's not a slight against Dan Quinn. I think Dan Quinn is still one of the most respected coaches in the NFL, but something just wasn't working with them. We've seen them trend upwards a little bit, and I think that you make some interesting points too in the storyline. No, Marshawn Lattimore not going to be available in this game for the New Orleans Saints. That's going to be a big factor. But Aaron, one thing I've noticed too, and we had a chance to talk, a couple of weeks ago. I feel like this Atlanta Falcons defense has also improved. They've been more aggressive. I think their corners have benefited very well in man-to-man situations. In your opinion, what transformation do you think the defense has taken from the first half of the season under Dan Quinn to now under Raheem Morris? What have they done different, if anything?
Well, the key for the Falcons defense is, as I've seen it, even going back to last year where they started off the season as one of the worst defenses in the league and then finished pretty strong, which was what facilitated that 6-2 finish in the second half. It seems like when this defense gets pressure, they're a very effective defense. And that happened in the second half of last season, particularly against NFC South opponents, where guys like Adrian Claiborne, among Grady Jarrett, among others, really stepping up in some of those games. And these last couple of weeks, it seems like the Falcons are being much more effective at getting pressure. Cody, of course, you know this. You watched it live a couple of weeks ago. But the Falcons have been very effective, particularly the last two games since that sort of late game collapse against the Detroit Lions in Week 7 with blitzing teams. And I feel like now that they're trusting a little bit more in their young secondary with guys like A.J. Terrell, who's, Pro Football Focus is grading him as the top rookie corner in this draft class, outperforming guys like CJ Henderson and Jeff Okudah that were drafted ahead of him. Now that they have a little bit more confidence in the ability of those guys on the back end to hold up in coverage. And another key factor, I think, is Keanu Neal, who coming off the Achilles injury. And we know that injury takes a little bit of time of recovering. And it seemed like around week 6, he started to look like the old Keanu Neal, being able to lock down those tight ends, which was a major problem for the Falcons in the first month or so of the season. And now that they can trust the guys on the back end, they're able to send more blitzes, be a little bit more creative with their pressure looks. And it has been effective, particularly against Carolina and Denver, with confusing some of these quarterbacks. And I feel like whether it's Jameis Winston, whether it's Taysom Hill, that's going to be a core element for the Falcons on, later today.
Yeah, I think that's the matchup between these two defenses going up against these two offenses is going to be really intriguing because both defenses sort of on an upward trajectory here. The Saints haven't allowed more than 25 points in 4 straight games, which for a Saints defense is very good. But at the same time, this Atlanta Falcons offense getting back a big weapon in Julio Jones. And we've talked about before over on the crossover, and I'd like to hear you speak a little bit more about it here. Julio Jones coming back isn't just a boost for Matt Ryan. It's also a bit of a boost for Calvin Ridley because he tends to perform well with Julio Jones in the lineup.
Yeah, as we said, for anybody that didn't listen to Ross and I's crossover this week, basically the summary of what I said was you put Julio Jones back in the lineup as the number 1, and all the other pieces fit into place. Calvin Ridley goes back to being that number 2, and then he can basically get those one-on-ones that he's had a lot of success taking advantage of so far this season. You put Russell Gage to the number 3 spot where he's able to sort of live in that slot and sort of be that guy that can help move the change, which he's made tremendous progress in that regard. Hayden Hurst, they've sort of revamped how they used him. Instead of trying to make him this sort of seam splitting, vertical stretch tight end, they're asking him to catch a lot more underneath stuff and be able to make plays after the catch, where he's been very effective in that role. And, it just makes all the other pieces fit, as well as getting a big time playmaker like Julio Jones to really challenge defenses. So it's sort of like, the thing I've said for many years on Locked On Falcons, Julio Jones is the sun, right? He is all the gravity in the solar system, and you need all the other planets to revolve around him. And without the sun, the lights go out. So it's one of those things where it just all the pieces fit together perfectly.
Yeah.
Well, Aaron, one of the things, too, I also want to throw your way, especially considering this being a divisional matchup. I mean, I wanted to get your thoughts on the Saints situation right now because there's some reports out there, and I am eager for the opponent perspective. But there are some people out there that are saying right now that they believe that the Saints should have went with Jameis Winston. Now, we could still see that, like Ross had alluded to earlier. But in your opinion, what does a guy like Jameis Winston present against this Atlanta Falcons defense in comparison to a guy like Taysom Hill?
Well, the thing Ross and I talked about on this week's crossover was Jameis. When you look at Jameis's production against the Falcons in his 5 years in Tampa Bay, there was no difference between what Jameis would do specifically against the Falcons and what Drew Brees would do against pretty much any defense. Like his career passer rating against the Falcons and across 5 seasons was like 110 or something like that, and his passer rating against literally anybody else in the league was like 84. So
right.
it was one of those things where looking at this matchup and seeing, like, you know, for at least the Falcons, historically speaking, when you look at how Jameis has performed against them, there's no difference between what Drew Brees is and what Jameis Winston is. Now, I know to literally the other 31 teams in the league, you know, that's not necessarily the case, but specifically with the Falcons, I think Jameis has been so effective. Not only is his ability to sort of navigate pressure and you know, avoid sort of those first hits in the backfield. So when the Falcons pass rush, on the rare occasions it was working in the past, they couldn't get him down. There was a infamous play, I think, in Jameis's rookie season where there was like a 3rd and 17 or something like that, and he scrambled around and converted, and it wound up being a big play to allow them to, you know, go and win the game. It's still burned in my memory. A nightmare that I wake up in cold sweats sometimes. But it's the other factor that Jameis always was able to exploit against the Falcons defense was generating those big explosive plays. And with weapons like Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, even Todd Perryman cooked the Falcons in their Week 17 game last year. It just seemed like Jameis's ability to push the ball down the field, and you would see the very best of Jameis Winston with those vertical throws. And he just sort of presented this sort of perfect package of the type of quarterback that the Bucs were hoping to see. Unfortunately for the Bucs, they didn't really see it outside of those 2 games against the Falcons on a consistent basis. But, you know, I think the challenges that Jameis brings, you know, potentially, at least in theory, based off of his performance against the Falcons, is, you know, the perfect passer, you know, that strong arm to push the ball down the field, the accuracy, the mobility, all the things. He checked all the boxes. The player that I think everybody thought Jameis was going to be as the number 1 pick in that 2015 draft, at least for the 2 Sundays he faced the Falcons over the last 5 years, he seemed to be that player.
Makes a lot of sense. I got to ask you, man, because look, before we get you out of here, the Saints and Falcons rivalry has grown in popularity across the NFL. We know that it's always been a very fun and a very fervent a rivalry, of course. But can I ask what your favorite memory of the Saints and Falcons rivalry is from your perspective so far? Or let me say one of your favorite memories, because I'm sure that there's tons.
There's so many. The 2 that immediately pop into my head, and it's hard to pick, you know, it's like your favorite child, was the 2012 game against the Saints, where the Falcons picked off Brees 5 times.
Yeah, that was a huge one.
And, you know, that was one of the few signature wins that Mike Smith had over the Saints during his tenure in Atlanta. And then the other one is just, you know, was it 2017? Where Deion Jones picked off
the Deion Jones interception.
Yeah.
Oh man,
and that game holds a special place because, you know, only a series before, Sean Payton was caught making the choking sign to Devontae Freeman after he had fumbled. And so, you know, anytime, you know, we like to throw that picture up on Twitter or anything like that, throw in Saints fans' face whenever the Saints, you know, choke or whatever the case may be.
Right.
But honestly, my favorite moments in the Falcons Saints rivalry is all the times that the Vikings have beat the Saints in the postseason. So
I feel much the same way about the Falcons blowing a 25-point lead in the Super Bowl. Some of it's not really about the Saints. It's just, you know, it's just great to see, right? No, absolutely, man. It's such a fun rivalry and everything. And like Aaron and I rarely really ever go back and forth, but every now and then I do like to lead into the rivalry a little bit and share some memories. Certainly that Deion Jones one is one. You mentioned about waking up in cold sweats at night. That's one that still lives in infamy for me, for sure.
Definitely. It can get as petty as we want to get it, right?
We appreciate you for coming through, man. Cody, you got anything else for Aaron?
Aaron, my man, I just want to say we didn't get a chance to talk after the Broncos-Falcons game, man, but we almost had you. We almost had you. I'm pulling the whole Paul Walker from Fast and the Furious. Dude, I almost had you.
Well, you know, when you play the Falcons defense, almost everybody almost has us at the end of the fourth quarter.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think they're a very promising young team. I think they're going to be, a lot of decisions in the future. Obviously, we'll see what the status is of Matt Ryan going forward, but I feel like they're headed in the right direction. They got a young nucleus of players that I do think are strong defensively. I think they can continue to transform and maybe elevate to where they can get back into the top 10 defensive units at some point.
Yeah, definitely. We'll see what happens.
We'll see how it works out. And we'll see how today works out. Enjoy the game today. We got an early one, thankfully. No need to wait any longer for Taysom Hill to make however abrupt it might be, a start against the Atlanta Falcons here. If y'all want to check out Aaron, make sure you follow him on Twitter at FalcFans. And of course, check out Locked on Falcons every Monday through Friday, one of the best shows on the network. This guy knows his stuff, and I learn something every single time I listen to him and talk to him. Aaron, we appreciate you coming through, man.
Appreciate you guys having me.
My man, Aaron's the GOAT.
Oh, for real.
We have some great. I feel like we have some great division mates too, as well. When we do our crossovers, it always makes it great. So the NFC South's got a great cast of local experts on the biggest stories. Same with the AFC West. So
yeah, man,
I'm excited, man. And we're gonna get one of those AFC West local experts here in just a moment. So I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, let's talk about some of these early games, Ross.
Yeah, let's get to it. So let's talk a little bit. So we talked a bit about Philly and Cleveland. We just finished wrapping up about Atlanta and New Orleans. Right now, New Orleans favored anywhere between 3.5 to 5, depending upon where you're looking. A lot of that probably has to do with them being at home. 6,000 fans in the dome for that one, by the way. The Washington football team is going to be taking on the Cincinnati Bengals. This one's going to be really interesting because we have the rookie quarterback in Joe Burrow, who's looked good. I think you could say that he's been probably second in the offensive rookie of the year conversation so far, behind maybe Justin Herbert, who's looked fantastic since starting. But this is a tough challenge for him. 194.7 passing yards allowed right now by the Washington football team, fewest in the NFL, going up against the young rookie here.
Yeah, they've tightened up, and I think getting Chase Young back from the injuries sustained early on this season, I think it's helped out that defense. I mean, they're still very aggressive, but their struggles right now are coming on the offensive side of the ball. And, I mean, like I said, they got into a little bit of a shootout. They had a good lead against the obviously, they came back last week against the Detroit Lions from that big deficit. Alex Smith leading the heroics there. This is one I feel like it could go either way. I mean, I feel like this one could be even as well. I mean, it's close to being even, obviously, in terms of the spread, but for Joe Burrow, I mean, they've been playing some competitive football as of late, and I think if they could get a lead early on in this game, I think they'll be good. I feel like they have the issue, though, when Cincinnati, when they're trailing by even one score, that's where they have the issue. I feel like that's where the pressure tightens up on them, which is to be expected with a young football team and obviously a young quarterback. But I think Cincinnati is trending in the upwards direction. But I don't know. This is a tough one. I feel like this could be a toss-up.
Yeah, I completely agree. This is going to be a very fun game to watch, nonetheless, though. A lot of young talent on this team. You've got the wide receivers and T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd, who have really stepped up for the young rookie Joe Burrow. And of course, Cincy just needing to figure out that offensive line going up against a very, very good pass rush, as you mentioned, with the Washington football team. We hit the even spread here on Detroit and Carolina. So let's jump ahead to Pittsburgh, heading to Jacksonville. Just a quick update on that. No Gardner Minshew for this one. So we get some more Jake Luton in this one. That's the way I like to refer to him. 5 of 9 wins so far for Pittsburgh have come in a 1-possession win. I do not think that will be the case going up against Jacksonville, favored 10.5 right now.
I don't know. The spread against Green Bay for Jacksonville was pretty big too, and
That's
they actually
true.
surprised us. This is a Jacksonville team that confuses me week in, week out, especially when we talk about putting some money on the line with it. One of the things in Pittsburgh, like I said, their defense is legit. I mean, I believe they truly do have the top defense in the National Football League. The one thing I would like to kind of pinpoint here too is Pittsburgh offensively. When they go through, they just got some of these inconsistencies, which could get them caught up against a team like Jacksonville. We saw that with the Packers last week. They had some offensive inconsistencies that came back to bite them in the tail. I still think Pittsburgh wins this one, but I don't know if it's going to hit the spread. I think it could end up being close, which is weird because Jacksonville, for some reason, under Jake Luton, he's been playing pretty impressive football as of late in terms of just being a guy. Like, he's just a guy. He's a jag.
Yeah, that's right. He's just a guy being a dude out there in Jacksonville. We got Tennessee traveling to take on Baltimore. These are 2 top teams in the AFC, but it's going to be the red zone that I'm going to be watching for this one. Right now, the red zone offense for the Tennessee Titans scoring at a 76.5% clip. Meanwhile, Baltimore is allowing scores at a 76.2% clip. So this is a very good red zone offense against a very, let's just say, shallow so far red zone defense.
which is so surprising because I feel like for Baltimore, the strength has been their defense this year. And when we look at them lately, their offense, I mean, Lamar Jackson, they're not what they were last year. And that to me, I think I don't know what to really attribute it to. And they have, Hollywood Brown, they're activating Des Bryant for this game as well. I know they've been missing Mark Ingram at the running back position. That obviously factors into it a little bit, but Baltimore's been a team that sitting at 6-3. I feel like they're worse than their record indicates, which is weird to say because they're 6-3. I mean, they're above 500. But I've been very just perplexed by Baltimore lately. They just offensively have struggled. So it's putting a lot of pressure on the defense, and that defense has been on the field for quite some time. And against a team like Tennessee that loves to run it down your throat, you can't be on the field constantly. You have to find a way to get off the field on third down, and that's something that Baltimore struggled on the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. Derrick Henry right now on pace to do it again, to average over 100 yards per game on the ground. Real quick before we move on to New England and Houston, very important message coming in through the chat. Got to go Broncos.
Oh, there's Lou there, but I don't know if you just saw the news. Did you just get the news from Adam Schefter?
No.
PJ Walker. Walker is getting the start today for the Carolina Panthers. Teddy Bridgewater is inactive, folks. We just talked with Bill Rossetti of Locked On Panthers, and obviously now we know PJ Walker, the thrill from obviously the XFL. We're going to see him put on a little bit of a clinic, which could be fun. I mean, they could find a way to utilize him in a way that the Saints utilize Taysom Hill.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to see a lot of NFC South mobile quarterback action for the first time since maybe the Michael Vick days. I think it's the last time we've really seen a mobile quarterback in any of these offenses. Now, none of them will be Michael Vick caliber, I don't think, but still be a lot of fun to watch. Next up, we've got New England, who's at -2.5 traveling to Houston. Houston right now giving up the third most fantasy points to running back. So if you've got Damian Harris, who is supposed to be healthy for this game, he is a must start, I would say, in this lineup. New England, coming off of a win here against the Jets. I ignorantly picked the Jets to get their first win against New England. I was trying to be nice, but hey, here we are.
It almost came true, Ross.
It almost happened.
Both Bill Belichick and Adam Gase, they were just having an ego battle of like, we're going to lose this game. Like, that's how it was. Both of them looked like they were trying to lose that game on Monday Night Football a few weeks ago. But obviously, I think for this one, there's some interesting factors that are going to play into this. Laramie Tunsil has been ruled out of this game. The Houston Texans have been battling a flu bug this week. And so, obviously, they're going to be without one of their highest paid left tackles in the National Football League against a New England defense that I feel like has gotten a little bit more aggressive. They've gotten better. And Stephon Gilmore is going to be returning into the lineup for New England. So, this is going to be one that I think that New England's going to go on the road. I think they're going to take care of business.
Yeah, I'd love to see it. I'm all about Cam winning at any point now that he's not in the NFC South, of course. Next up, we'll look at the afternoon slate of games. Fewer afternoon games. Like we mentioned, we're back to a usual rhythm here. Oh, actually, you know what? Before we get to that, we did get a question in the chat that I'm happy to address. Ross, do you think that Sean Payton sits Cesar Ruiz and plugs in Nick Easton at right guard? This is actually a really good question because the quarterback change for the Saints going toward Taysom Hill, as we expect, leans a little bit more over to the run game where rookie Cesar Ruiz has actually been more productive than he has been in the passing game. He's given up a lot in the passing game going up against some very strong defensive linemen over the last few weeks. They've been plugging in Nick Easton when they need to in order to get through some passing sets, but in the run game, Cesar Ruiz has been pretty impressive there. So that will be something to watch, and to watch that matchup on the interior with Grady Jarrett as well with Atlanta.
Interior crocodile alligator, Ross. We're on one right now, my friend. But yeah, I'm a big Ruiz guy. I'm a big fan of him. But in this matchup, I think it's going to be imperative that the Saints have some balance. So we could talk about that a little bit more towards the end of the show as well. So
yeah, we'll get into it because I have a really interesting sort of team structure concept around that very idea. So let's jump over to Miami going up against Denver for this one. Traveling to Denver, what do we need to know about this matchup?
Drew Lock will play in this game. I mean, he suffered a big shot from Arden Key last week against the Raiders, and he has a severe bruise, strained muscles on his rib cage area. Nothing like to Drew Brees. I mean, that was, oh my goodness, and reading that in comparison, which is weird because Drew Lock was actually asked this week in the media press conference that last year he suffered the thumb injury, same thing that Drew Brees suffered, and then The week Drew Brees gets a rib injury, Drew Lock gets a rib injury. So it's like, what the hell is going on with Drew squared over there? But he's going to play in this game. The expectation he's going to play. Noah Fant also had a rib injury as well. He's going to play in this matchup. But see, the Broncos offense, they have to find a way to get, the run game going against a very aggressive defense by Brian Flores and the Miami Dolphins. He's done a phenomenal job, by the way. I mean, they're a team that's competing right now for the AFC East division with Buffalo, with New England, and they are just a tough team. And now Tua Tagovailoa, he's back into the mix here. He's he's getting a little bit more fresh week in and week out. More experience. Matt Brady will likely get the start at running back because they're going to be without Myles Gaskin, and also they're going to be without Preston Williams at wide receiver. So they're a little depleted there, but Jakeem Grant and Devontae Parker are still two players to keep an eye on this matchup for the Broncos in the secondary, where you're going to have A.J. Boye and Bryce Callahan looking to match up against them.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't wait for this matchup. This is going to be a lot of fun. I've mentioned it before. Brian Flores right up there with Mike Tomlin for me in that Coach of the Year conversation thus far. Next up, we've got the New York Jets heading to take on the Los Angeles Chargers. LA favored here, -9.5. What more can you say about the New York Jets other than winless?
I mean, I don't know. It's like the same thing with the Chargers. Like, for example, I didn't expect them to lose against Miami last week. I mean, that was a big surprise because Miami offensively actually had some success with the quick passing game against Herbert and the Chargers. So you had Tua coming out on top against Justin Herbert. You had Tua a couple weeks ago coming out on top against Kyler Murray. And so I think it's led to Tua mania right now in the National Football League. But for Justin Herbert and this Chargers football team, I just feel like they are lacking a consistent identity, right? They will get leads in games, they'll blow it. And Anthony Lynn, the pressure is on him. I mean, they have so much offensive firepower. You've seen that this season, Ross, when they played the Saints. I've seen it. And all of a sudden, we're just trying to figure out what is going wrong with this team. Now, they are going to get Chris Harris Jr. back for this game. And I just don't know if the Jets have enough firepower to maybe match up against them defensively. But then again, it's like, this has been such a weird season. We think teams that are supposed to get blown out, I mean, they're competing or they're winning. So who knows? Yeah. That you mentioned earlier the Green Bay Jacksonville game, which was such a surprise, such a shocker just last week as well. Could be another one of those games this week. Speaking of Green Bay, we got Green Bay heading to Indianapolis to take on the Colts. Colts are favored at home here. But Aaron only has one AFC loss ever since Matt LaFleur took over at head coach. They have been an outstanding offense so far. The defense has been, consistent. They're dealing with some injuries or an extended injury over on with one of their defensive backs out there, but still very talented on the back end for this Green Bay team. But Indianapolis has surprised me before. Matt LaFleur. One of the things that stood out to me about Green Bay this year was just the chemistry that Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams have with one another. I mean, they have multiple games this year where they have 2+ touchdowns thrown to each other, throwing and catching, obviously. And they're such a different dynamic. And for me, I think this is going to be an interesting matchup, how the Indianapolis Colts defense really matches up. You have, a variety of different players there outside at cornerback, Xavier Rhodes, and you also factor in, at the top of my head, I forgot the rookie cornerback's name that's down there in Indianapolis. But he's playing pretty good football right now, whoever he is. I'm sorry, I forgot his name there. But this is going to be an interesting matchup because we saw the Green Bay Packers struggle last week at home against Jacksonville. Defensively, Indianapolis, I think, is tougher. I think they're stouter, and they're going to send a lot more pressure after Aaron Rodgers. So part of me feels like this might be a trap game for Green Bay, in my opinion. I feel like they've been playing kind of high and low the last couple of weeks. This can be the one place where they go where I feel like they can't have the type of performance they had last week. If they play the way they did against Indianapolis, the way they did against Jacksonville last week, I think Indianapolis might get them by 2 scores. Yeah, they need more peaks, no valleys. That's what they're going to need in this game for sure. Then we've got Dallas at Minnesota. The Minnesota Vikings and the Dallas Cowboys both getting 2 of the top wide receivers in this class. One of them getting more of an opportunity to showcase himself. CeeDee Lamb for the Dallas Cowboys. Production's been down a little bit, what with all of the quarterback changes, all over the place, going from Ben DiNucci to starting off the season, of course, with Dak
Uncle
Prescott,
Rico.
who was incredible. Uncle Rico came through for a little bit. Just so much going on over there. But Justin Jefferson has really built some really nice chemistry and a trustworthy relationship so far with Kirk Cousins, who had to learn, life after Stephon Diggs. And so far, the second part of that chapter not been so bad for Kirk Cousins.
No, Minnesota's start to the season was absolutely the worst start they could have envisioned, but they've actually put together some great performances in the last couple of weeks, Ross, and a lot of it's been led by Dalvin Cook. And so when you have a dynamic back like Dalvin Cook, you're going to face defenses that load the box against you,
And that opens up opportunities once those defenses do that for guys like Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen to get free. And Justin Jefferson is one of those guys that is making those big plays of 20-plus yards consistently every single week. And it's because defenses are tightening up and his route running ability, his ability to get behind defenders, he's making teams pay. And really out of the Gary Kubiak offense, some of the play action, that's where Kirk Cousins really thrives.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a lot of fun to watch and not bad for a guy that everybody asks if he's going to be able to play on the outside because he spent so much time playing in the slot at LSU to be able to move in here. And then, of course, we've seen this Vikings defense begin to perform. And, of course, Dalvin Cook. And as you mentioned, just the way that he's been playing has been outstanding. I think you've got 2 award winner conversations right now going on in that Minnesota Vikings offense. Justin Jefferson, probably the top non-quarterback in the Offensive Rookie of the Year conversation. Dalvin Cook, probably the same in terms of top non-quarterback in terms of the MVP conversation, but certainly well entrenched.
And Alvin Kamara.
And Alvin Kamara, of course. I don't want to toot the Saints' horn too much, but obviously Alvin Kamara is performing very well. And I think that both those two backs are at the top of the conversation for Offensive Player of the Year so far for certain. But we'll dig into awards a little bit later on in the season as we get closer and closer here. Week 11, it's bittersweet. It's great that we've made it this far. It's sad that we are this far. So let's go ahead and dive into. We still have the two primetime games to discuss, but we'll be able to discuss them as we pick them. Shall we go ahead and get into our Locked On NFL Sunday picks to wrap up the show?
Yes, sir. I'm all with it. This is one of my favorite things to get into. So let's roll it, Ross.
Let's go. So we'll start off with the first one. I will give you first say on this one. Obviously, the Atlanta Falcons traveling to take on the New Orleans Saints right now, favored anywhere between -3.5 to 5. The New Orleans Saints, as we discussed in depth earlier, going to be starting Taysom Hill here. Let me quickly add some context to the question that came in earlier about Cesar Ruiz. One of the things that's really interesting is that when you look at the way that this team has been built so far, it can operate with a pocket passer, as we've seen it do with Drew Brees already this season, but there's enough athleticism on the offensive line, some good perimeter blocking from these wide receivers, and of course, enough wherewithal with those backs in the backfield as well, who can do a little bit of everything. Feels like it's an offense that can support a mobile, or let me say play extending quarterback like Taysom Hill. Will be very interesting to see what this offense looks like. First time we'll get a chance to see Sean Payton put together a game plan for a quarterback like Taysom Hill. What's your expectation for this game?
I expect to see some RPOs, and I also expect to see some traditional drop back here for Taysom Hill, because from what I read so far this morning on some of the media reports is that Sean Payton wants to know, is Taysom Hill the future quarterback, which I know you and I have talked about. We don't believe that's necessarily the case because he is 31, and he is a different type of player, and he doesn't have too much of a background of being a consistent pocket passing quarterback. However, as you had mentioned in terms of the guard, I think that what we can see from Sean Payton, we're going to see some RPOs, but I think we're going to see some designed quarterback runs, which is going to involve, as you mentioned, a guard pull to get him outside or even to crash it down inside. I do see some designed zone read plays here for Taysom Hill, and especially once they get into the goal line. So now we're going to actually see, Ross, in this game, when Taysom Hill has a full field, what can he do, right? Rather than Drew Brees being at midfield, then bringing in Taysom Hill, and then all of a sudden them going backwards or losing the football. Now we're going to see what really Taysom Hill has, and I think it's going to be a big test. And I think also not having Marshawn Lattimore is a big question. I feel like this could be a toss-up, man.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, actually. I mean, this can go either way. It's already weird because it's a division game, and as we've discussed several times, completely unpredictable. But I'll tell you one thing is that the Saints have the advantage of familiarity while the Falcons no longer do, because there's no way to look and see what this offense is going to look like. But you know that they're going to try to get Taysom Hill in rhythm to see what he can do as a pocket passer, as a passing quarterback. That's the point, I think, at which you take advantage of it. If you're the Atlanta Falcons defense, you put pressure, you send players from the second level, you force them to make quick reads. We'll see how he's going to be able to handle himself through adversity. And remember, Taysom Hill, uncharacteristically, 4 fumbles already this season, having given up two fumbles just in the last game as well. So that will be something else to watch. We've got a prediction here from our boy Tito. He's taking the Saints 40-35. Big
Tito's been accurate too.
I know he's been on it.
So, something about the tea leaves there, Tito. You got the magic. I mean, you probably took the sports almanac from Back to the Future, man. So there might be something in there.
Might be something there for sure. This is a game that we've broken down a little bit already as well. The Tennessee Titans traveling to take on the Baltimore Ravens -6. What are you taking here?
I've got Tennessee in this matchup. I think that Baltimore, like I said, their offensive struggles have really, really hurt them. It's put their defense in inopportune situations as of late. Defense has been on the field way too much. And the thing that you're going to run into is against a team like Tennessee that's going to wear you down physically, it bodes well for them. So I'm going to go with Tennessee in this game.
Yeah, I am a non-believer in the Tennessee Titans no more. I'm going to take the Tennessee Titans here. They've outperformed my expectations, and I think Luke Braun over from Locked On Vikings, he and I had a conversation about these guys in our Tuesday episode of Locked On NFL. He spoke a bit about how this is a team that is outperforming its roster. That speaks to coaching. That speaks to a guy like Mike Vrabel and what he's been able to do. This is a tone-setting game for Tennessee to sort of cement themselves at the top of the AFC with no further questions asked. I think there's a lot to gain for Tennessee getting this win. So I'm going to take them here too. I'm really interested to see how this one works out.
Well, and even I think a big storyline for this game too is the fact that Jadeveon Clowney was placed on injured reserve.
That's right.
I wonder how much of that factor, is going to factor. Nice little cup you got there for your coffee mug. You got the New Orleans Saints. I've got the Aspen, Colorado coffee. Almost looks like the Saints logo in it.
Yeah, it's got the same colors. I was wondering for a little bit.
But in terms of the Green Bay Packers at the Indianapolis Colts, Ross, I'm going to throw this one to you first. We know Aaron Rodgers, down years for him are career years for other quarterbacks, right? So far, he's not having a down year, though. He's having a pretty damn good year. In your opinion, they're on the road to Indianapolis against a tough, stingy defense that I think is going through the highs and lows. Phillip Rivers obviously playing some pretty good football right now. How does this one go?
Yeah, I'm going to take Green Bay for this one. As we've mentioned, they're going to need more peaks and they need valleys in order to win this game. But I'll tell you, the return of Allen Lazard is definitely a big one for this team to get him back. He's had an outstanding game, and of course, he does more for this team than just downfield receptions and things like that. He is somebody that serves a lot of different purposes, even as a blocker in the run game for that really dynamic running attack that Green Bay does have at their disposal. So I'll take Green Bay to travel on the road and get this one. I don't think that Aaron Rodgers drops his second AFC game since 2019 just yet.
Yeah, no, that'd be a big surprise. I'm going to go with Green Bay as well. I think, the connection with Devontae Adams, I'm eager to see how his ankle is holding up. I mean, it's been a consistent issue for him, but he's been able to power through it. But the chemistry between these two guys is very, very immeasurable in comparison to where other people are at. And they got a good flow for one another. So if Green Bay can reduce the turnovers that they've had, and really hasn't really been by Aaron Rodgers, it's been by Devontae Adams' fumble last week, running backs not holding on to the ball. I feel like this is going to be a game where Green Bay kind of gets back on track. And it's an important stretch. We're at week 11. Every game from here on out matters in terms of seeding implications.
Yeah, so, all of a sudden we're talking about playoff implications. That came
playoffs.
It came very quickly.
So now we got the Los Angeles Rams. This is a fun matchup, too, on Monday Night Football on the road against Tampa Bay. I mean, when you think about Aaron Donald and you think about this Rams defense against Tom Brady, it kind of makes you salivate. But then we look at the Los Angeles Rams, who they've struggled. I mean, Miami absolutely made their offense look inept.
Right.
And so for me, I'm a little concerned because Tampa Bay, I think, is playing some of the best football right now. And I know it's evident they're missing Vita Vea on that defensive line.
Right.
That's one thing I've noticed when watching Tampa Bay. But other guys are really stepping up. I mean, the back end of that secondary is phenomenal. Their linebackers are absolutely legitimate. I mean, with 4.4 speed, the ability to blitz and the ability to cover receivers and running backs out of the backfield. This is going to be such an interesting dynamic against this Sean McVay offense. And we've seen the strategy for many NFL teams. One of the things that Sean McVay does is he's so stingy. Sometimes it appears that he's unwilling to change what he's doing when it's not working. You can't do that against a team like Tampa Bay.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And look, we've got David Harrison, one of the hosts of Locked On Bucs here. He says, "Don't let me down here, guys." And I think it sounds like we definitely won't be, because I'm going to take Tampa Bay here as well. I just think that, look, Tampa Bay, they suffered a big national loss, on that primetime game to the New Orleans Saints, and I think that it changed everyone's perception of them a little bit prematurely. Personally,
yeah.
It's a division game. We've always talked about how strange those can be, and especially division games in Tampa Bay in Tampa, between Tampa Bay and the New Orleans Saints are always very strange. So I'm not banking too much in terms of the end of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers here just yet. I'm going to look for them to win this game because you pointed it out. when defenses perform against the Rams have trouble winning as a team. And so that's what I'm going to be looking for here. And I think that this Tampa Bay defense matches up pretty well against a stubborn Rams offense.
Yeah, they really do. And we always talk about every year. I feel like ever since Tom Brady's been in the NFL, there's always that one loss in the regular season that people are like, oh, okay. Well, think about it too. It happened in the first week against the Saints. They lost, and it was like, oh, they were talking like, oh, Tom Brady is not the same anymore. He doesn't look the same. He looks worse. And then he goes in and he has that stretch where he plays really damn good football. You have the 38-3 loss, and he goes out and just plays phenomenal, efficient football against Carolina. This, I feel like this is the story for any time that Tom Brady loses, they get revamped up and they get pissed off, and they're playing pissed off right now. And so this is going to be, I think we're going to see Tampa Bay absolutely take it to LA.
Yeah, I think this is going to be very fun. I'm glad that this one's on Monday Night Football. We got some very good primetime matchups this week. We had the great Thursday night game. We have that Monday night game tonight. We've got the Kansas City Chiefs heading to the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, obviously, you're very familiar with these teams. They're division mates of yours in that very exciting AFC West. What are you looking for in this matchup?
It's going to be interesting. Can the Raiders replicate a little bit of the success they had against Patrick Mahomes the last time? And really, they were able to get downfield with a couple explosive plays to Henry Ruggs, who had 2 catches over 100 yards against that Chiefs defense in the last matchup. I think when I watched the Raiders last week, because the Broncos played the Raiders, one of the things we noticed with these two teams was that the Raiders were just a much more physical football team. They love to run the football. They're very efficient at it, and they have the weapons offensively to do it. Defensively, they're also getting pressure on quarterbacks as well. They're also sending 6-man rush. So I think for a team like Kansas City, I don't know if they're going to be able to replicate the same performance. I mean, the Raiders replicate the same performance against the Chiefs. Right. I think the Chiefs are playing really good football right now, but Mitchell Schwartz has been placed on injured reserve, so that throws a little bit of a different dynamic into how this game is going to go. This is a toss-up to me. I think it's going to be a very tough one.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a really tough one too. Look, the Raiders beat the Chiefs in Arrowhead on top of that.
40-32.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, like, if the Raiders win, it has to be a high-scoring game. Kansas City, interestingly enough, has put up 23 or more points in the last 23 games, so they continue to score and score and score. So I'm going to take Kansas City here. It's hard to beat any team twice in a season. It's particularly hard to beat Patrick Mahomes twice in a season, I would imagine. You could probably tell us better than I can guess. But this is a tough matchup for both of these teams. Again, it's a very good primetime game, but I'm going to take Kansas City to get their win here. And you know what? We have a moment. We always like to wrap up and making sure that we're talking about, given aspects from the teams that we cover. So real quick, I want to throw in one more game here. The Miami Dolphins favored -4 traveling to Denver to take on the Broncos. What's your pick for this game? We talked about it. We broke it down, but what's the pick?
If for some reason I have a little bit more optimism in this week, and it's not because of the Broncos offense. I think that the Broncos defense this week, I think because of the fact that Miami's missing Myles Gaskin, they're going with Matt Breida, who's their third leading rusher. He's only got 100 and something yards on the season. So really, I think the Broncos will focus on shutting down the run. They got the defensive backfield, I think, to match up really well against Tua and against this receiving core that they have right now. I think the Broncos are going to edge this one out. But for me, I think the biggest key is going to be in the Broncos offense. If the Broncos offense plays the way they did last week, I think Miami's going to win this one. So this one's really a toss-up, but part of me feels a little optimistic that Denver's going to get another win this season, go to 4-6.
Yeah, I completely hear you on that one. I think that the matchup between Denver's offense and Miami's defense is going to be so fun to watch. There are so many keys all across that. It'd be fun for me as somebody from a third party sitting back and watching, because it's either going to be what we've seen from Miami over the last few weeks, which is defensive dominance, or it's going to be a Denver Broncos youthful, very exciting, has a lot of tools offense, sort of collapsing this Miami defense that we've seen performing so far. I'm sure that's the fun part for you, but it's going to be one or the other. And I think for me, as somebody from the outside looking in, it's a really, really interesting matchup watching these two teams go at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing is I wanted to throw to you, because we were talking about the Saints-Falcons matchup a little bit earlier, but I never really got to ask you what your real opinion was, because I know we've talked about it before, but when you're looking at this matchup, do you really believe that Taysom Hill may be the guy of the future? I mean, has that stance from you changed at all?
Yeah, I think that, like, looking at it from this perspective and just working with the information that we know and that we have at this moment, it's hard for me to say yes, that I can see Taysom Hill right now being the heir apparent to Drew Brees and the future of the New Orleans Saints franchise. However, we finally get the sample size that we've all been saying that we don't have in order to really start to make that assessment. I have to be very clear. I don't think that if Taysom Hill goes out there and excels, that it's a definite yes. And I also don't think that if Taysom Hill goes out there and plays poorly, that it's a definite no. I think that it affects the weight that he has in the conversation, but it doesn't wrap up the decision after just one game. But my biggest sort of hesitation when it comes to talk about Taysom Hill is the future of the New Orleans Saints, particularly when comparing to a 5-year starter, first overall selection, 5,000-yard passer in Jameis Winston, is simply that it's extremely hard to compare those two quarterbacks and come out on the right side of Taysom Hill. So now we actually get the opportunity to see, we get the sample size, we get the example that has been so fleeting so far. Shout out to Fleets on Twitter, but it's been so fleeting so far. And so, finally actually going to be able to get an assessment here. And I'm really, really excited. I'm so excited for this game.
I agree with you there. I think the overall sample size we see from Taysom Hill is small already, but a full game, I think, like you mentioned, is going to bear some weight to that. And I think it also gives you the conversation with Drew Brees. We know he's on injured reserve right now. Could they make, if it doesn't work out with Taysom Hill this week, could they maybe look at Jameis Winston next week to see what they have with Jameis? Right. I mean, we don't know at this point. So these are interesting because next week the Saints and the Broncos face off.
We might have a lot to talk about.
We will. It'll be fun for sure.
Well, y'all, we appreciate you. It's another Locked On NFL Sunday in the books. Thank you to those of you that came out and showed support, dropped your questions in the chat, and just sort of participated all throughout the show here. We always love that, whether you're watching us on Facebook, whether you're watching us on Periscope, YouTube, or what's the other one that I always forget? Twitch. That's the one I always forget. Or on Twitch. We appreciate you being here and for checking us out. And of course, we'll be back on Sunday for our next Locked On NFL Sunday show. And don't forget to catch Cody and I on Thursday on our shows, Locked On Broncos, Locked On Saints, with our crossover.
It's going to be fun this week. I'm looking forward to it, Ross, and obviously a great slate of NFL action here in Week 11. You heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen, the local experts on the biggest stories. Your Week 11 NFL pregame show is wrapped up, and be sure to check everything out. Locked On, whatever your favorite podcast may be, Locked On Broncos, Locked On Saints, whatever local team you support, we have a podcast for you on the Locked On NFL Network, your